right, we're back. Graveyard Shift Movie Podcast, episode number 128. This week, it's not Cult of Chucky again. um, yeah, it's near the holidays. Tyler's real busy, so we just haven't been able to do it. So so it's not. Instead, I had to go to the dentist today to get a teeth cleaning and shit. And because of that, I got the inspiration to check out The Dentist from 1996, directed by Brian Usna, who I forgot he directed it. And when it popped up that it was directed by Brian Usna, I was like, oh shit. For those of you who don't know, the first movie we ever watched on the channel was Society, which is directed by Brian Usna. So I was very excited to see his name in the the opening credits at the beginning of the movie. And yeah, I think this one is pretty good, actually. I'm going to give it a 6.5. Yeah, you wouldn't think a horror movie about like The Dentist would be good, but yeah, I think it's pretty well done, especially compared to Society. If you know, we were kind of iffy on Society. That movie was, I think, 7 years before this movie came out. So I think it was clear to me that Brian Usna had a lot of time to learn how to be a better director and how to tell a story more in a straightforward manner. Society's kind of all over the place, and a lot of it is kind of like, a lot of times it's just out of place and you're like, what's going on here? But I never felt like there was a moment in this movie where I was like, all right, well, what does this have to do with the movie? I always felt like we were moving in one direction. My brain wanted to sing a One Direction song just then, and I couldn't think of one. Girl, you're beautiful, right? That's one, right? I'm pretty sure. But anyway, yeah, so I'm going to give it a 6.5. Check it out if you want to. It's on Tubi. I went to Tubi to watch it. Shout out to Tubi, becoming one of my favorite services for the podcast. It seems like every time I want to watch one of these obscure movies, it's on Tubi. It's always free. The ad breaks, I will say, I feel like I just was on Tubi to watch something the other day, and it didn't have that many ad breaks, but this one seemed to have a lot, and they didn't time them good. Like, it would be, like, in the middle of something happening, there would be an ad, and I would be like, oh, okay, well, let me wait 40 seconds, and I'll find out what's going to happen here. But besides that, it's still pretty convenient, so shout out to Tubi. Hey, Tubi, sponsor, please. Yeah, so there you go. Also, if you notice, no camera on me today. I'm going to try something different. I'm probably just going to edit. I mean, we've done it in the past, usually when my computer was broken. That's not the case here today. I don't know. The webcam, when it's just me, I don't like how it looks. And so I think maybe it's just more interesting to have, like, clips or pictures playing while so I think that's how I'm gonna try this out. I don't know if this is gonna be a permanent thing anytime it's just me doing an episode, but I'm gonna try it for this one. So the computer's fine. I just felt like trying something different for this episode. But yeah, so anyway, spoiler warning for The Dentist. If you've never seen it, I'm gonna ruin everything about it, so you've been warned. The movie starts off with our main character. His name's Alan. I don't know his last name, but he's a dentist, and he will tell you many times throughout the course of this movie that he is, in fact, a dentist. And he's watching his wife hanging out by the pool, and she's talking to the pool man. And he's like, "Oh, look at her." Talking to the pool man. That's what he said in the movie. And eventually when she comes inside, he just like starts bitching to her about like he's missing his cufflinks and like his shirt is dirty and just all this random shit, and like it's their anniversary and all this stuff. And eventually she pulls out a box and she has a present for him that's like diamond cufflinks or whatever. And he's like, "Oh man, what would I do without you?" You know. And then he tries to make out with her and he grabs her by the arm, and I thought it was a bruise on her arm, but we'll learn later it was some muck. And the question is, where did the muck come from? And that's what we'll solve in about 2 minutes when I tell you. And so he tries making out with her, and she sort of like shakes him off, and she's like, "Oh, not right now. We got to get ready for dinner. You got to go to work, all this stuff." And he's looking, he's like, she's wearing a robe, and he's like, "Hey, you're naked under here. What's up with that?" And she's like, "Oh, it's comfortable." And he's like, "Yeah, but you were just outside talking to the pool guy. Like, what are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, whatever. I can do what I want." So he's like, "Whatever. Fuck you." He doesn't say that, but so he leaves, and as he's on his way out, he talks to the pool guy, and the pool guy's like, "Oh, hey, your filter, it's got sludge and shit in it. I gotta clean that up. I can only do it next week." And the guy's like, "Nah, you're gonna do it tomorrow." And the dude's like, "Nah, man, only can do it next week. I'm busy tomorrow." And they have this whole like little spat, and finally the dude's like, "Oh," and he walks off. But as he walks off, he registers in his head that he just saw the pool guy wiping the pool sludge like on his clothes, and he realizes that the pool sludge on his fingers where he grabbed his wife's arm, that's the same sludge that was on his arm. And so he's like, "Motherfucker." And so he's driving to work, and he stops. He like slams on the brakes and comes back to his house and slowly sneaks inside. And he sneaks over to the window to look out where his wife is, and he sees this bitch just sucking cock. just out by the pool, just butt-ass naked. Really gross. The dude's like shoving his finger in her mouth, but it's like the gross pool finger and stuff, and she's just like, because, she's a slut. And, yeah, and he's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this," And then he has a hallucination as he's watching it of going out there and forcing his wife to like stay with the dick in her mouth and to point a gun at the dude's head. And he's like, "I'm a dentist. That means that her bite is perfect." And he's like, "Go ahead, honey. Show him your bite. Show him." And he keeps trying to get the wife to like bite this dude's dick. And then he shoots the guy, and that's when it pans out and like the hallucination is done. I'm going to wait for this phone call to be done. So after he sees that, he's like, "Fuck, this sucks." We go over to the dentist office that he owns. I don't know if he owns it or he just runs it or what, but he's like the head doctor there. And we see all these people trying to check in, but they can't check in because he's running late because he's having this whole like crisis going on. And as it goes and shows the group of people trying to check in, I see this one guy, and I'm like, why does that guy look familiar? And he gets closer to the camera, and I realize it's Mark Ruffalo, a very young Mark Ruffalo, the Hulk himself, is in this movie, and he plays like a talent agent dude and stuff. Yeah, and so shout out to Mark Ruffalo. I imagine this must be one of, if not his first movie that he ever did, so that's pretty cool. Eventually we see the reason why everyone can't check in and why the doctor is late is because he's following the pool man around after the pool man leaves his house. And he follows the pool man to his next client's house that just so happens to be like, I thought it was just like a lady who came to his dentist office, but apparently she's like a friend of the wife or like a family friend or something, because later on we'll see a picture that he has on his desk of this lady and his wife together. So I'm not sure what the relationship is there, but they definitely know each other because as he's sneaking up, she like walks out and he's like, "Oh, hey, you need to come in for that filling, you know?" And she's like, "Yeah, you know, whatever, whatever." Um, and so he goes back to spying on the dude in the pool man in the back, and it turns out that this pool man is just running a racket on pussy, and he is just banging all these chicks because the girl comes back there, and it turns out that he's banging her too. And so the dentist dude is like, "Oh my god," you know? And then the woman's pet Rottweiler sees him like sneaking around in the back, and we just get a straight up Rottweiler attack. Like he manages to push the dog away for a second and run to the gate, but the dog beats him to the gate, and so then it just jumps on him and it's biting his arm and shit. And finally, he has his gun in his hand, and he just has to blow this dog's head off and just shoot this dog in the head. And kills it. And that dog will be a very critical part of how, spoiler, how they end up tracking him down for what he's doing. So eventually he finally gets back to the dentist's office after he's done all this stuff. And his first patient of the day is this little kid who it's his first time coming to the dentist. And I think he's just there for like a cleaning or something. And he tells the nurse, he's like, "Oh, take him to the safari room." And we go in the safari, and it turns out every room is designed differently. So there's the safari room that you go in, and there's a bunch of bushes and all this stuff, and they play a tape of like jungle noises and shit. There's a room just called Heaven that's the most boring room, where it's just like painted blue in the skies, and I think there's an angel on the wall. And they might play like some harp music or something. And then there's like the Grand Opera Room, which is by far the nicest. Where like the furniture is the nicest, and it's the biggest room, and it keeps playing the same opera song over and over on repeat. But they take this kid in the safari room, and they say it's all about making the dentist, a funner place to be for kids, and more interactive and all this shit. I think I've mentioned it before, but my dentist, the one I still go to today, but I'm too old for it and it kind of blows, which is I used to go for the cleaning, and they have TVs that they'll bring down off of the ceiling, and you could watch a movie. And I used to watch like the first 35 minutes of Night at the Museum every time I went there, because it takes like 35 minutes for everything to finish. So I would only get to see like 35 minutes of the movie, and I'd be like, "All right, time to go." But now I'm a big boy, so I can't do that anymore. So he's cleaning this kid's teeth. He's like picking around with the needle. If you've gone for a teeth cleaning, you know this part where they're just like sort of scraping your teeth with this hook needle thing. And eventually he starts to think about his wife cheating on him again. And he starts mumbling to himself, and he's like, "Goddamn bitch, gonna take everything from me, you know?" And the mom who's sitting there is like, "Oh, what's going on?" And the nurse is like, are you okay, you know?" And then he starts having these weird visions that the kid's teeth are all rotten, and his whole mouth is like just rotted and dirty and shit. And he's freaking out, and eventually it blows over to where he like he stabs the kid in like his gum, and the kid starts bleeding and shit. And the mom is like, "Okay, fuck this, I'm going home." And she like takes the kid and pieces out, and they leave. And I couldn't help but think, like, I don't think you can just go home from that. Like, the he just got stabbed in the mouth. Like, I don't know if that just heals by itself. I think you have to like go get a stitch or or something, you know? I don't think you're just allowed to leave and carry on like nothing happened. But who am I? Maybe that's how it works. So the nurse is like, "What the fuck was that?" And he's like, "I don't know, that kid's teeth, it was all dirty and shit in there, and I just slipped, So he goes to his office, and he calls his wife, like all depressed and shit. And he's like, "I'm just thinking about the first time I looked at your teeth, And she's like, "Are you alright? Are you having one of your episodes?" And we had seen when he opened up his desk that he had a whole bunch of pills and shit. So I think this dude, like, this is a thing that this guy suffered with, and now with the revelation that like his wife is cheating on him or whatever, like it's fucking him up, and so he's having the visions more. Even though like the dude was a piece of shit in the beginning of the movie, so I'm not like, oh man, this guy has a medical condition that's fucking making him do this. No, he was a piece of shit, but it is interesting that like this is something he suffered with in the past, I guess. Yeah, sip of water time, guys. Oh man, that was good. What are you guys drinking on? You got a little, that one guy I see you with the Lipton green tea over there. So also when they hang up, I do like they hang up and the wife goes asshole, and then he goes bitch, and both on opposite ends, you know. Um, After that gets over, we pan back to where the dog was shot, and we see a bunch of detectives at the crime scene, and they're trying to find who shot this dog. And the head detective of the movie is none other than Ken Foray, who is making his fifth appearance on the podcast. He was in Rob Zombie's Halloween, I think the first one, where he gets killed by Michael at the truck stop, and that's how Michael gets his jumpsuit. And then he was in the Devil's Rejects, and then he was also in that other Lords of Salem, that other Rob Zombie movie. And I don't know if he's been in anything else. But yeah, so I think maybe this is his fourth time on the podcast. So shout out to Kim Foray. So yeah, Kim Foray's here, and they're like, "Oh man, the dog was shot," you know. So they're like, "All right, well let's track the bullet." So we go into the waiting room with the same people who were trying to check in earlier, and Mark Ruffalo is talking to this one lady who I swear she's supposed to be like 17. And she has braces, and she's getting the braces off. And so she's all like excited, you know. And he's like, "Have you ever modeled before? You should model." And he gives her a card because he's a talent agent. And then he like makes her stand up in the lobby and like walk like a model. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? I take it back. Maybe this is the one part of the movie that I was like, why is this here? Because I said how it seemed like everything had a point for being there. But maybe that one is like, what's going on? Meanwhile, as they're in the Mark Ruffalo, eventually, as he's making the girl like walk around like this, he asks the lady, the receptionist, he's like, "What's going on with Allie?" I think is the name of the lady, who I thought was his wife, but it turns out she's just a client of his, and she's in the heaven room, and she's all about like her looks and shit, and she's super like, you know, I gotta make sure I'm perfect and stuff like that. And the doctor comes in and looks at her, and he looks at an x-ray, and he's like, "Oh, she has a shadow on molar 15 or whatever." And so he tells her that she has a cavity, and he's like, "Let's do it now. Let's give her a filling," you know? The lady is afraid of needles, so the doctor's like, "Have you ever had nitrous oxide?" And so he just starts like pumping her full of nitrous, to the point that she's basically passed out. And then he starts having hallucinations, and he starts to like just finger her mouth. And then he gets visions of his wife laying there naked, and her being like, "Yeah, come here, come, you know, have sex with me," or whatever. And so he goes and he starts like making out with her and taking off her clothes and shit, you know. But eventually they knock off like the mask or whatever, and she's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And the dude's like, "Oh shit," because he realized her clothes are all messed up. He had yanked off like her pantyhose, and he's like, "Oh man, you're having a you're having a bad reaction to the nitrous, you know? Mark Ruffalo had snuck back there to try to figure out what was going on. And so when the lady sort of stumbles out of the room, the doctor's trying to get her back into the chair, but Mark Ruffalo sees them and he's like, "What's going on?" And so the doctor makes up like a lie about how she's having a bad reaction to the nitrous. And at first he's like, "Oh, just have her sit back in the chair." But then he looks in and sees like her pantyhose and stuff on the ground. And so he's like, "Actually, you know what? Why don't you guys go outside and get some fresh air? Because that's better for her." And so Mark Ruffalo's like, "Okay, okay." So he picks her up and carries her outside. And the doctor's like, "Oh, man, that was close." He goes back to his office, and the main nurse, who I think her name's like Vanessa or something like that, she goes in the room to clean up, and she notices the pantyhose and the heels and stuff sitting in there, and she's like, "Oh, what the fuck is this?" She takes the pantyhose to the other nurse in this movie, and shows it to her, and she's like, "Listen, this dude was in there doing something, something bad." But the one nurse is like, "Well, have you asked Alan about it? Why, that could have fallen out of her purse." And the lady's like, "No, I didn't ask Alan about it, and I'm not going to. So the lady's like, "All right, and she's like, "Listen, just keep an eye on him because something weird is going on." So then, as all this is happening, a guy from the IRS shows up, and he's here to talk to Alan about, like, money he owes the IRS and all this shit. So he's talking to Alan at the front desk, but as they're talking, Mark Ruffalo busts back in, and he's like, "You fucking pervert," and he punches the doctor in the face, because, like, the girl, I guess, eventually cleared up enough to realize what was happening and told him. And he's like, "I'm gonna sue this place. You're gonna, I'm gonna fuck you over," all this shit. As he's yelling at her, I noticed that the girl who was getting her braces taken out is standing there watching this, but that doesn't make any sense because she was just in the back room getting ready to get her braces taken out. So I don't know why she would suddenly be standing up front, but, whatever. So the doctor's had enough of, like, all this shit that's going on. So he just tells everyone, he's like, "Everyone just go home for the day. We'll reschedule everyone's appointments. Just leave for the day." So he goes to, like, his office to sulk and stuff. I think I missed it, or it could have been at this moment where he's looking at pictures on his desk, and that's when he sees the picture of the wife and the friend who he shot like dog. And I just love it because in the background of the picture, suddenly just a hallucination of the pool man pops up, and he's like, "Oh, I'm fucking your wife," and it's just really, it was just funny. I liked it. So we flash to nighttime, and everyone's gone from the office, but Alan's wife just showed up because he hasn't come home yet, and they have reservations for dinner that night for their anniversary, and they're gonna be late for the reservations, or they're just gonna miss it. So she's walking around looking for him until eventually she hears like a bunch of opera music playing. And so she follows the opera music and comes into the Grand Opera dentist room. This is the first time we see it. And Alan's standing there, and he's like, "Do you like it? This is my favorite room," and all this stuff. And basically he's like, "Listen, it's our anniversary. I've been thinking of the first time I treated your teeth." I'm going to guess that he met his wife through a dentist appointment. Like, she was just a client, and that's how they met. So he's like, "Just for old time's sake, let me look at your teeth, And so she's like, "Okay, whatever." But as soon as she sits in the chair, she gets like a scarf tied around her neck, and she's tied down to the chair, and then the nitrous gets put over her nose, so she's getting pumped full of nitrous and shit. He immediately like cranks open her mouth and just starts yanking out teeth, and just pulling them out, and like he's like, "No, this is what you wanted, you dirty bitch," and he's like pulling out her teeth and shit. And eventually it fades to black, and we come up, and he's drug her home, and her mouth is just like destroyed. Uh, and he's like, now we wait for your little boyfriend to get here. So it goes to morning time, and we see that he's tied her up on a pool chair and put like a sun hat over her face so you can't see her face, just in time for the pool man to get there. But as he's waiting for the pool man to see what he's done, the detectives, Ken Foray and them, show up to his house, and they're asking him about, has he heard anything happen recently? There was a robbery, a dog was killed, all this stuff. And he's like, no, sir, I haven't heard that, Meanwhile, in the background, there's literally a knife and a bottle of pills and a bunch of drugs, like, sitting on the table, but they don't notice that, because of course not. And before they leave, they're like, well, hey, can we ask, do you own a gun? And the dentist dude is like, no, of course I don't own a gun. And so they're like, all right, have a good day. And so they leave. Right as they're leaving, the pool man is skimming the pool, and he pulls out a tongue that is floating around there. And he's like, what the fuck? And so he goes over to the wife and takes off her sun hat and sees that her mouth is just like, the tongue is gone, and the dentist dude has like filed her teeth in the points and shit. And he's like, oh my god. And she's pointing behind him, but before he can look, Alan comes up behind him with a knife, and he's like, you did this. And then he cuts the dude's throat. The pool guy starts like stumbling backwards while he's holding his throat, and Alan just keeps slashing him with this kitchen knife, and every time he does, blood like squirts out onto the pavement and shit. And it honestly looked really good. Like, it was a really good practical effect of just the blood shooting out and stuff. And finally he like stabs the guy in the chest, and and Alan kills the pool guy. I took another sip. I see you switched to High C, the tropical punch flavor of High C. That's good. That's a good flavor. So, the wife is dead, or no, the pool man's dead. And so the guy is like, all right, time to go back to the dentist office. So he goes back to his office, and he's taking care of the lady who he shot her dog the other day, because he said that she needed to come in for a filling and shit. And so he's getting her ready for the filling, but as he is, she starts talking about the pool man, and she's like, haha, he's really good, And so the dude's like, motherfucking, So before she even has time to get numb from the shot that he gives her, he starts going to town with his drill, and we get like up close with the drill, and basically he's just destroying her tooth, like just like carving that bitch up. And it gets to the point that his head nurse, that Vanessa lady who has the pantyhose, is like, can we take a break for a minute? And she pulls him out of the room, and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? You're destroying that lady's tooth. And he's like, I'm a goddamn dentist. I run this office. Don't ever question me, And so he's like, fuck off. Go do your job. Get her more comfortable for me to come back in there. As she goes in there, the other nurse comes out and says that the guy from the IRS is back and wants to talk with him. And the dude's like, fucking, this dude just won't leave me alone. So he's dealing with that nurse. The one nurse goes into the room with the lady who just got her molar destroyed. And she's like, listen, I think you need to leave. So she hurries up and gets that lady out of there. So when the dentist comes back in, he sees that she's gone. And he's like, where the fuck did she go? And the nurse is like, I told her to leave. You're in no condition to be treating somebody, And he's like, you fucking bitch. And he fires her. He's like, get the fuck out of here. You should have, this is your fault that this happened. You're fired. So before she leaves, she's like, oh, really? And she pulls out the pantyhose from her purse. And she's like, look at this shit right here. What were you doing to that lady the other day? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, oh yeah, really? I'm going to shut you down and make sure everyone knows, who you are. And she goes to leave, but of course he like wraps the pantyhose around her neck and pulls her back into the room, and forces her into the dentist chair. And she tries to pick up a needle and stab him with it, but he ends up like choking her to where she can't do it. And I thought she was just like passed out, but no, this is her death. He kills her here. He just strangles her with the pantyhose until she's dead. And so the main nurse lady is also dead. Um, After that, we go over to the cops again, who just got a forensic report on the bullet that shot the dog, and they find out that 3 people in the neighborhood own the type of gun that shot that dog, and one of them is the dentist. And they already know that the dentist dude lied about not about having a gun. So they're like, that motherfucker, it must have been him. So they immediately drive over to the doctor's house because they're going to go arrest him. So we go back to the dentist, and he is dealing with the IRS guy. And basically, the IRS guy is like, listen, I don't need to go to my supervisors about what you owe us as long as you slip me some nitrous on the side. Basically, he just wants to get high, you know? And so the doctor dude's like, sure. So he puts him in the chair, and he starts pumping him full of nitrous and gets him super high. And then, of course, he ends up tying his hands to the chair, and he starts to... Well, first he puts in like a jaw crank pump, and he cranks it to where the dude's jaw just keeps expanding to the point that it's broken, and his mouth is like just super wide. And then he takes a drill, and he's drilling into the dude's tongue and shit. And the guy's just screaming, you know? As this is happening, the detectives show up at the dentist's house, and they find the drugs and shit on the table, and they find the dead pool guy out back. And eventually they go upstairs, and they find the wife who's tied up, and her mouth is still all fucked up, but she's still alive. And so they're like, motherfucker, you know? We go back to the dentist office, and the other nurse has just been informed that the Vanessa lady was fired, you know? So she's cleaning up shit in like a closet, and she finds Vanessa's purse. And she's like, well, why the fuck would she leave that here if she was fired? So she goes to show the doctor, but when she goes in the room, she sees the IRS dude tied up and his mouth all fucked up, you know? And she's like, what's going on? And she turns around, and the doctor's standing there. And he's like, he deserved it. He's a disease and all this shit. And eventually she tries to run, but the dentist catches her and takes a needle and sticks her in the vein on the neck and fills her vein with air, so that, you know, that is never good when air gets in your bloodstream, and so that ends up killing her. So that nurse is also dead. So we go to the girl with the braces, who's been trying to get the braces taken off the whole movie, and she finally gets called back there to get her braces off. And as she's walking back, we get a shot of the doctor or the cops like on their way to the dentist's office. We go, and the dentist finally does. He takes her braces off and shit, and she's all happy, and she's like, how do I look? And she's smiling, but the dentist dude just sees like rotten teeth because he's all crazy, you know? And he's like, oh yeah, it's a shame that the rest of your life you're just gonna rot away and be a useless fucking bitch, you know? And she's like, oh yeah. She's like, all right, can I leave now? But he's like, no. And he pulls out his gun from his pocket, and he aims it at her, and he's about to shoot her because he sees his wife sitting there. But for a split second, he's able to see that it's actually the braces lady, and so it stops him for just enough for her to kick the big light around to swing into the dude's face, and for her to run out of the room. At this point, we get like the classic final girl, where she's like having to hide from the killer, and she's finding bodies. She hides in a closet, and the body of that Vanessa lady, the nurse who got strangled, falls on her and shit. She runs out of there into the room with the IRS guy and finds him, and she unties him, just in time for the dentist dude to come in there and be like, "Oh man, why are you running away from me?" And he starts to attack her, and they're both crawling on the ground. But the IRS guy is able to get up and fall on top of the dentist just enough for the girl to crawl out of the room. This doesn't do anything, though, because as soon as she crawls out of the room, the dentist dude's just standing there, and he grabs her and forces her to go into the Grand Opera room. And he sits her down, and he's about to shoot her, but she makes one final plea to him that she'll never eat candy, and she'll brush 3 times a day and all this shit. And he's like, "You'll never eat candy?" And she's like, "No, no." And she's like, "And brush 3 times a day." And she's like, "Yeah, yeah." So finally, when the cops get there and they bust into the room, they see that the dentist has left that lady by herself. Like, he didn't hurt her, and he left her there, And we see him in his car driving away, and he puts on like that same opera song when he turns on the radio and he's driving away and shit. And so I was like, all right, cool. That's the end of the movie. But nope, there's still another 15 minutes maybe where the cops start asking the braces lady and the receptionist questions. And eventually the receptionist mentions that he's a teacher. And they're like, "He's a teacher? Where?" And they race over to this college that there's a dentistry course. And the guy, I guess, left from doing all that crime to going and teaching a class. And immediately in the class, he's still batshit crazy. So he starts telling all of his students to just start pulling out everyone's teeth. But naturally, everyone's sort of like, "What?" And they're like, "We're not going to do that." So he pulls out his gun and he starts waving around. And he's like, "Fucking do it," The cops bust in, but he takes a hostage and manages to get to the door before he pushes her away and goes running. He runs until he gets to like a stairway where he hides behind a corner, and he's sitting there for a minute, and then he starts hearing that same opera song that's been playing through the whole movie, and he follows it into an auditorium where this lady is singing, and he grabs her by the arm, and when she turns around, he sees his wife all with her fucked up mouth and shit. And he's like, "Oh, no," And so finally, I guess this is what causes him to realize that he's like batshit crazy. So he drops the gun and like drops to his knees, and he has another hallucination of like his wife laughing at him and shit. And then Ken Foray and them finally run in, and they arrest him. And we flash to him in a mental asylum in a straitjacket. And the movie ends with him being drugged to a dentist's chair where his wife is like drilling into his mouth. But obviously I think that that's like, that's just his crazy hallucination. But yeah, and that's the end of The Dentist. I don't know how I know there's a sequel to this movie. Maybe I'll watch that one day for an overtime. But yeah, I don't know how that's going to work out, seeing as how that's why I thought the end of the movie was going to be him going away, because I knew the sequel. So I was like, oh, maybe he'll just get away or whatever. But no, he gets arrested. So, I don't know how that'll work. This movie had a budget of $2.6 million. I didn't see a box office. Maybe, let's see. Let me see. Let's see if I can find one real fast. No, I couldn't find one. So, yeah, so it had a budget of 2 point. It might have honestly been straight to DVD. This is a movie that I would pass by going to like video stores in the horror section, and I would see it all the time. But I never watched it until now. Best of, worst of for The Dentist. My best of, honestly, is going to be the pool guy when he's walking backwards getting slashed. Like, a movie that is built around a dentist and, like, the horror of, like, getting your mouth fucked up like that and stuff. That's cool and all, but really, I just really like the effect of the blood splatters every time he would get slashed. I thought it was really cool. So that's my best of. Worst of is gonna be Mark Ruffalo making that lady walk around like a model in the fucking in the lobby. That's my worst of. That was a pretty easy pick. So there you go. That's my best of, worst of. For the dentist, like I said, it's pretty good for for a '90s horror movie. Maybe the worst decade of horror. No, the 2000s were pretty rough. 2000 to 2010, that's pretty bad. The '90s aren't great, especially after Scream, because a lot of them tried to replicate Scream, and it wasn't very great. But then again, there are a lot of good movies, good horror movies I like from the '90s. Event Horizon, one of my favorites. That's from there. Idle Hands, that's a nice one. Is Idle Hands '90s? That might have been 2000s, like early 2000. I don't know. American Psycho, right? That might be 2002. Not 2002, but 2000. You know what I'm saying. Um, anyway, but yeah, it's pretty good. So go watch it if you want to, even if you just listen to me talk about it. Next week, like I said, maybe it'll be maybe it'll be Cult of Chucky. I'm not sure. I'm trying my best. Tyler's trying to do it, but busy. So if it's not, who knows? It'll be something, but I can't promise you what it'll be right now. Yeah, go check out the gaming channel and everything. Link in the description for that. The new Scream teaser trailer dropped. It was about, it was a teaser trailer. I kind of hope, or not, but the whole trailer's on a subway, and I kind of hope that the whole movie just takes place on a train. Like, I just think that'd be cool. Maybe that's because I just watched that Bullet Train movie, and that whole movie takes place on a train for the most part. So maybe that's why I'm, thinking that. But yeah. What was it? I watched Wednesday. I remember we were talking about it a couple episodes ago, and neither one of us had watched it. But yeah, it was all right. It was fine. There is a point where you realize like they have like 8 different love triangles going on all at once. And I predicted who the bad guy was in literally their first appearance on screen. I went, "Oh, they're the bad guy." So, I'm not saying I'm a genius or nothing, but so anyway. All right, thanks for watching, listening. Yeah. That's about it. I don't know if anyone's here. Does anyone care about listening to these? I stopped uploading on Spotify a while ago because somehow the website I would use fucked up, and like it wouldn't let me for a while, but I think I can. So I don't know if there's any interest in Spotify and like, the audio podcasts and stuff. But if there is, maybe I'll start uploading the old episodes and going from there. But, yeah, just, I don't know. Maybe, who knows? Anyway, thanks for watching. See you guys next week for whatever. Hopefully Cult, but I don't know. And yeah, see you guys.